This is the story of brutal murder of Robinson family part 2, early evidence. Because nearly a month had passed between the murders and their July discovery, police started by talking to people about what they'd seen and heard near the family's cottage at the end of June. They interviewed a local man and teen who'd handled some tree trimming for the Robinsons on June 25, 1968, and likely were the last locals to see the family alive. Officers talked to other neighbors who remembered hearing raised voices and rapid gunshots coming from the property around that time, but assumed it was someone shooting seagulls on the beach. The investigation quickly centered on someone much closer to Dick Robison's inner circle. Joseph Scolaro III of Birmingham had worked for Robison's advertising and publishing companies since 1965. The U.S. Army veteran was listed as an assistant to the publisher. As the investigation into the multiple homicides progressed and the laboratory analysis of the evidence seized at the scene of the murders became available, glaring discrepancies in the statements of Joseph Scolaro III, business associate of murder victim Richard C. Robinson, father, would become obvious. Police wrote in a case summary document. The more they dug, the more inconsistencies they found between the evidence and what Scolaro had told them. Investigators began to question Scolaro's alibi at the time of the slayings. Grave questions arose as to the whereabouts of Joseph Scolaro III on June 25, 1968, as well as to the location on that date of two weapons which were known to have been in his possession previously, one of which, as it turns out, appears to have fired some of the bullets found in the bodies of certain murder victims at the Robinson cottage. Scolaro told police the last time he'd talked to his boss was a phone call on June 25, 1968, when Robinson asked him whether some company checks had arrived at the Southfield office. The guy was as smooth as glass, said Wiles, who listened to hours of taped police interviews as part of his research. It was like trying to nail down Jell-O. Investigators later said they believed Scolaro had recently given himself a large raise and bump to his expense account and given other employees raises without Robison's knowledge. Writing on pre-signed checks showed Scolaro was filling out larger than normal amounts in the weeks before the slayings, evidence showed. But Emmett County's new and fiscally conservative prosecutor made it clear in 1970 he was not going to bring charges and go through an expensive trial. Wiles said that prosecutor, Don Nuggle, had the backing of a similarly penny-pinching county board. Emmett County didn't want to pay for the case, it has to be that, said Wiles. He was not about to get embroiled in a 6-count murder case. The commissioners, he said, would not spend a nickel. They didn't want to pay for the autopsies. They didn't want to pay for the disinterment. We don't mind taking summer resorters' money, but we don't want to spend any money on them, he said of their attitude at the time. Meanwhile, state police created a synopsis of the findings, hoping to nudge charges along, but to no avail. It was so big, it was so obvious who did it, it was like an elephant in the room, Wiles said. The Robinson family, pictured in a story that ran in the Grand Rapids Press in July 1968. A perfect match. The really impressive detective and crime lab work surrounded the two guns police say were connected to the case, a .25 caliber Beretta automatic pistol and an uncommon .22 caliber Armalite AR-7 rifle. Records obtained by police show Scolaro had purchased two of each, though he later claimed he'd given one of the pistols to Robinson and given both the rifles away. But witness statements led police in 1969 to a private shooting range owned by Scolaro's father-in-law. Detectives found AR-7 shell casings there that exactly matched those found at the crime scene, according to a state police lab report. This turned out to be the smoking gun for investigators, who had long been pushing for a break in the case. The state police were under scrutiny, if you will, to come to a conclusion, so they were meticulously careful about this investigation, said Ron Kovalt, a longtime former assistant prosecutor for Oakland County who reviewed all the evidence as authorities were preparing to bring charges in 1973. I was totally impressed with their work. They chased down leads everywhere to be absolutely certain of where the focus should be. He also gave a hat tip to the Michigan State Police Crime Lab and their work with the guns. Forensic evidence development then was in the early stages of growth, not coming close to today's CSI style of depth. That was the turning point in the evidence. That was the key to this case, Kovault said. A shift to the east side, then a suicide. As the years passed and Emmett County still declined to bring charges, the investigation shifted to Oakland County. This was where Robeson's business was based, and the alleged embezzlement took place. In 1972, Kovault's incoming boss was Oakland County Prosecutor L. Brooks Patterson, who'd told him to get the Robeson murder reports from the state police and get their impressions of the case. By the time he reached office, I'd reached my conclusion that Joseph was the killer. I took my opinion and filed to Patterson. He said, "We're going to charge that man with murder." Kovault believes he would have seen 6 charges of first-degree murder aimed at Scolaro. Clearly, this was an ambush that started outside the cabin and finished inside, he said. But no arrest warrant for Scolaro was ever issued. Kovault said shortly before authorities planned to request the charges, Scolaro killed himself in March of 1973. There were rumors that Scolaro got wind of the charges, but Kovault said he doesn't like to think anyone he worked with would have leaked that information. Scolaro continued to deny the allegations until his last moments, leaving a sentence on his suicide note stating he did not kill the Robesons. He scrawled at the bottom of the typewritten note, "P.S. I had nothing to do with the Robesons. I'm a cheat but not a murderer," according to a state police photo of the note, which is featured on author Marty Link's website. 50 years later, for Kovault, Wiles, Link and others involved in these traveling presentations, it's important to them to let the community know they believe this traumatic incident has been resolved. I think that the community in northern Michigan and Emmett County wants reassurance that the killer is not among them, Kovault said. I think that's a big part of it. I think it was a shock, and this shockwave persisted for 50 years. Because there was no trial and no specific legal outcome, people are free to gossip and speculate. Wiles said getting the truth out has been a relief for the local communities surrounding Good Heart. So many resorters up there were so young in 1968 and so scared. I think that has stuck in their mind, said Wiles, who used the Freedom of Information Act to obtain and review hundreds of pages of police documents on the case. He's used this information to help create the traveling presentations. None of them really have ever heard the truth. After Scolaro's death, the investigation ended abruptly. They didn't know what to do, so they put it in the inactive file, Wiles said of authorities. It was never a mystery to police. They didn't care what the public wrote. In the ensuing decades, local theories and gossip about possible suspects filtered in to fill the vacuum of real information. By replacing this chatter with the case facts, the retired investigators and others hope they are finally putting the rumors to rest. This has just intrigued people for 50 years, Wiles said. It just won't go away.